I did promise good health news, right? We finally got to it?
This is the piece of good health news.
You're welcome.
Yay! We did it!
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Rolling Forward podcast,
SCOTUS Summer Edition.
which I'm enjoying. Let us know what you think.
I'm Dr. Alicia Rolin.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Rolin.
We are both practicing physicians and part-time researchers.
And also at times having to decipher what the law means, especially when the law keeps shifting. This summer, we're bringing you our SCOTUS Summer. We're going to dive into the health implications, especially for children and families, of cases that were decided by the Supreme Court in 2025.
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
This week, FDA versus Wages and White Lion.
And if you haven't heard of this one before, that's okay. I hadn't either. And Alicia brought it to my attention, and I immediately thought that this was a really important one to highlight because this is really a Supreme Court showdown over flavored e-cigarettes and whether the FDA can do its job.
So this week, we'll unpack what this case is about and what the Supreme Court decided and why this matters for kids, teens, and the future of public health.
So let's get started.
So the case starts.
The rewind sound. Cue in. Do people even still know the tapes that rewind? The VCRs and tapes?
When you had the pencil in one side and you would rotate.
Oh my gosh. And then the tape would go. Oh, yes.
But this case starts back in 2009 when Congress gave the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, power to regulate tobacco under the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act.
And when the FDA got the power to regulate tobacco, that included these newer products that were coming out, things like vapes and e-cigarettes, things that are pretty ubiquitous today.
This act actually banned flavored cigarettes, which is why we see flavored e-cigarettes, but we don't really see any flavored cigarettes in the United States, with the exception of menthol.
Strange, but okay. This act also placed limits on how tobacco products could be advertised to minors, and it required tobacco companies to seek FDA approval if they had a new tobacco product.
And that's through something called the Pre-Market Tobacco Production Application, PMTA. And as part of that process, companies have to show that their new tobacco products were, quote, appropriate for the protection of public health.
Which is so weird because I never thought about a tobacco product having any role in public health. But in fact, what we're seeing with the emergence of e-cigarettes and vaping is the potential for something called harm reduction, where you are switching from one product that has harm to another product that also has harm, but less harm.
And that has actually been really successful in clinical trials for adults.
There was a clinical trial in New Zealand called the Ascend trial. This was a randomized control trial of 657 adults who had nicotine dependence and who wanted to quit. And they were randomized to get a nicotine patch, to get an e-cigarette that had nicotine in it, or to get a placebo e-cigarette. So an e-cigarette that looks like it has nicotine in it, but it does not. And overall, this trial found that the nicotine e-cigarettes help reduce use and suggested they could be as effective as nicotine patches.
And this has been shown in other studies. There was a study in the UK that also randomized nearly 900 adults to e-cigarettes versus other forms of nicotine replacement. And it found better rates of abstinence on patients that received e-cigarettes versus the other options.
Overall, science is suggesting that e-cigarettes may be more effective than other forms of nicotine replacement therapy for helping adult smokers quit cigarettes, especially at 6 to 12 months out from the beginning of that. However, it's important to recognize that nicotine dependence is continuing. This is not about complete cessation of nicotine use, but rather harm reduction, because traditional cigarettes contain over 7,000 chemicals, dozens of which are known carcinogens. In comparison, e-cigarettes have so many fewer toxins and are overall thought to be safer than a traditional cigarette. But again, not harmless, just harm reduction. So Alicia, that's the science, but how does this come up with the Supreme Court case?
Enter two different vape companies, Wages and White Lion, which joint is called Triton Distributions, and Vapetasia. These are companies that market flavored liquid nicotine. So those little I don't even know if they're packet. They're little containers that you put in your e-cigarettes.
Cartridges.
They're cartridges. These are cartridges that you put in e-cigarettes. They were hoping to have funny names like, and these are real, Suicide Bunny Mother's Milk and Cookies, Iced Pineapple Express, Killer Custard Blueberry with a K on custard, and Jimmy the Juice Man Peachy Strawberry.
But their application for this was denied by the FDA in 2021.
The reason? The FDA said that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that these flavors helped adults quit smoking, and there was too much evidence that they were attracting kids to start smoking.
So Triton sued. They said the FDA had changed the rules, that these rules were implemented after they had already submitted an application requesting approval of, again, Suicide Bunny Mother's Milk and Cookies as a way to help adults quit smoking.
So the Supreme Court decided to take on this case, heard arguments in December, and made a decision in April of 2025.
And what did they decide?
In a very rare unanimous decision, all 9 Supreme Court justices sided with the FDA, upholding the agency's authority to deny marketing approval for flavored e-cigarette products that lack sufficient public health evidence.
It's stunning that all 9 of the justices agreed with each other on this one.
On anything.
On anything.
On anything. So Justice Alito wrote the majority opinion for the court, stating that the FDA acted within its statutory authority, and manufacturers needed to include robust scientific evidence showing that flavored vapes help adults quit smoking without attracting young adults from starting to smoke.
Which is to say, these companies can still make their vape products. They can still make flavored vapes. They can still call them ridiculous names like Suicide Bunny. However, they need to show evidence that this is actually helping adults quit smoking and to demonstrate that it's not disproportionately harming youth.
Because Iced Pineapple Express is definitely targeting adults age 65.
And this is funny because smoking is highest among people that are 45 to 64. It's hard to imagine that's the group that is going to find Jimmy the Juice Man Peachy Strawberry the most appealing flavor. Whereas in comparison, most new smokers are young adults, typically under 21. And that's exactly who I think would find Jimmy the Juice Man Peachy Strawberry appealing.
I just imagine the 14-year-old kids going to the store and finding these to be hilarious.
Absolutely. I remember Joe Camel when we were growing up. He seemed so cool. And there's a history of how tobacco and cigarettes have been marketed to children and has led to increased smoking rates in children. So it's really important that the FDA be exercising their public health authority to regulate these new products.
So the court unanimously made this decision, and this decision did not expand or restrict the FDA's power. It simply affirmed that the agency had followed the proper procedure and that they had exercised reasonable scientific judgment in line with its mission.
So let's jump into the health impact, because this case, it wasn't just a regulatory issue. It was also about protecting children specifically from developing nicotine dependence.
And the reason why this really matters is that flavored e-cigarettes is really the gateway for youth nicotine use. E-cigarettes were the most commonly used tobacco products among middle and high school